The hiss of a closing jet bridge door is a final sound. For Dr. Roland Maxwell, it was the sound of corporate arrogance, of a snap judgment made in the sterile fluorescent light of Gate B-74. The pilot, a man with silver hair and a dismissive smirk, had looked right through him, seeing not a titan of industry, but a threat. He had denied him boarding on the last flight out, citing a vague security concern. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the pilot couldn't know he wasn't just leaving one passenger behind. He was grounding his entire airline. The consequences of that single prejudiced decision wouldn't just cost him his job. They would trigger a multi-million-dollar crisis and an FAA shutdown notice that would bring a fleet of aircraft to a screeching halt the very next morning. This is the story of how a quiet CEO, a vial of life-saving medicine, and a forgotten software update collided to deliver a lesson in karma at 30,000 feet. The air in Denver International Airport had the late-night smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Dr. Roland Maxwell, CEO of Etheria Dynamics, felt the familiar bone-deep weariness of a man who spent more time in airline terminals than his own bed. Dressed in a simple black hoodie, comfortable travel pants, and a pair of worn-in sneakers, he blended in with the river of exhausted travelers. He didn't wear the armor of his position, no tailored suit, no gleaming Rolex. His power wasn't in what he wore, but in what he knew. Tonight, that knowledge was a heavy burden. In his carry-on bag, nestled inside a temperature-controlled container, was a single vial of experimental gene therapy medication. It was for his daughter, 10-year-old Nina, who was fighting a rare autoimmune disorder at a specialized clinic in Seattle. This was the last dose of a critical trial batch, and her next treatment was at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Missing it wasn't an option. He arrived at Gate B-74 just as the final boarding call for Summit Air Flight 1127 to Seattle was echoing through the terminal. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, with her name tag askew, was already starting to pack up. "I'm here for Flight 1127, Roland said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. He presented his phone with the boarding pass displayed. Brenda glanced at him, then at the nearly empty seating area, and sighed. "Sir, we've already closed boarding. The door to the jet bridge is still open," Roland pointed out gently. "The announcement just finished. I'm right here." "It's the pilot's discretion, sir. He's running a tight schedule." She spoke into her microphone. "Captain, I have one more passenger here at the gate." A gruff voice crackled back loud enough for Roland to hear. "Brenda, I told you we're closing out. We're already 5 minutes behind." "Who is it? Dr. Roland Maxwell, sir." There was a pause. Then the cockpit door must have opened because the pilot himself appeared at the end of the jet bridge framed by the aircraft door. He was a man in his late 50s, with a proud posture and a thick, neatly trimmed silver mustache. His uniform was immaculate, a testament to a long career. This was Captain Frank Gallagher, a 30-year veteran with Summit Air, a man who considered the aircraft his kingdom from nose to tail. Gallagher's eyes swept over Roland, taking in the hoodie, the casual attire, and the dark skin. His gaze lingered, and a subtle shift occurred in his expression. A tightening around the mouth, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in his eyes. He didn't see a desperate father or a paying customer. He saw a stereotype. "We're done here," Gallagher said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man used to being obeyed. "He's too late." "Captain, With all due respect, Roland began stepping forward. "I have the boarding pass. The door is open. I have a critical medical situation I need to get to." Gallagher held up a hand, a gesture that was both a stop sign and a dismissal. "Sir, I don't know what your situation is, but you look agitated. And showing up at the last second like this, for the safety and security of my flight, I'm not comfortable with it. My decision is final." Roland was momentarily stunned into silence. Agitated. He was the calmest person in a 50-foot radius. He took a deep breath, fighting back the wave of indignation. This wasn't the time for anger. "Captain Gallagher Roland," said his voice dropping to a low, firm tone. He pulled out his wallet and presented his corporate ID, which clearly stated his name and title. "Dr. Roland Maxwell, Chief Executive Officer, Etheria Dynamics. My company is a Tier 1 supplier for the Department of Defense and a critical partner to the entire aerospace industry, including the manufacturer of the very Embraer E175 you're about to fly. I assure you I am not a security risk. I am a father trying to get life-saving medicine to his child." The mention of Etheria Dynamics should have at least triggered a spark of recognition. It was a name that anyone in aviation should know. But Gallagher barely glanced at the ID. He saw the plea as a challenge to his authority. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," Gallagher sneered, a small smirk playing on his lips. "On this aircraft, my word is law. You're not getting on." He turned to the gate agent. Brenda shut the door. "Now." Brenda looked from Gallagher's unyielding face to Roland's stunned one, her expression a mixture of fear and apology. She fumbled with the controls. With a heavy pneumatic hiss, the thick metal door of the jet bridge began to close, sealing the entrance to the plane. Roland stood frozen, watching the gap shrink until it was gone. Through the small window in the door, he could see Captain Gallagher turn his back and walk toward the cockpit, disappearing from view. The finality of it was absolute. He stepped over to the large terminal window, his phone feeling heavy and useless in his hand. He watched as the ground crew disconnected the tug. He saw the navigation lights flash. The engines of the Embraer whined to life, a sound he knew intimately from a design and engineering perspective. Flight 1127 pushed back, pivoted, and slowly taxied toward the runway, its red tail light shrinking in the darkness. Inside that plane was a man who had, in a single moment of unadulterated prejudice, made a decision that he believed had no consequences beyond a single inconvenienced passenger. He was wrong. Roland didn't shout. He didn't pound on the glass. The fire of his anger was instantly forged into something cold, hard, and impossibly sharp. He looked at the departing plane, a vessel operated by a company that was about to learn a very, very hard lesson. He wasn't just a CEO. He was the CEO of the one company that held their entire operation in the palm of his hand. And Captain Gallagher had just squeezed. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact for his chief legal counsel. He didn't need to get to Seattle tonight anymore. The damage was done. His daughter would miss her dose. A new plan was already forming in his mind, a plan of precise, devastating, and entirely legal consequences. The fury Roland felt was a white-hot, silent inferno. It was the familiar, soul-crushing anger of being judged not by the content of his character or the weight of his accomplishments, but by the color of his skin and the casual fabric of his hoodie. It was an old poison one he had learned to metabolize into fuel. But this time, it was different. This time, it involved his daughter. He walked away from the gate, his footsteps unnervingly steady, He found a quiet, deserted corner of the terminal, the cheerful advertisements for rental cars and luxury watches mocking the turmoil inside him. He sat down, the sterile plastic chair cold against him. His first call wasn't to his wife to deliver the bad news. Not yet. He couldn't bear the thought of hearing her voice crack with disappointment and fear for their child. His first call was to Dr. Ann Sharma, the head of the clinical trial in Seattle. He explained the situation in clipped professional tones, devoid of emotion. "The dose is with me in Denver," he stated. "I've missed the last flight. What are our options?" Sharma was silent for a moment. "Roland, this is problematic. The protocol is rigid. Missing a dose at this stage could set her back weeks, maybe months. We might even have to pull her from the trial." The words hit him like a physical blow. "No," Roland said, his voice a low command. "That will not happen. Find a way. The only way is to get that specific vial here. It's calibrated for her biomass and current antibody levels. We need it before 9 a.m. Then you'll have it," Roland promised, though he had no idea how. He ended the call. His second call was to a name deep in his contacts list, one he rarely used. The screen read Phoenix Air Services, Nick. Phoenix wasn't a commercial airline. It was a high-end, discreet private charter service that catered to government agencies and Fortune 100 executives. They specialized in the impossible. "Nick, it's Roland Maxwell." "Dr. Maxwell." "It's 11 p.m. in Denver." "I trust you're not calling to admire the mountain air," the voice on the other end said, smooth and efficient. "I need a Gulfstream G650. Wheels up from Centennial Airport in 90 minutes. Destination is Boeing Field, Seattle. I need to be on the ground no later than 2 a.m. Pacific time. This is a code red medical emergency." There was no hesitation. "Consider it done. A car will be at your location at DIA in 20 minutes. Just send me the terminal and door number. Is the manifest just you, just me, and a medical package? We'll handle it. The jet will be fueled and waiting." The logistics of his daughter's immediate crisis were now in motion. The cost would be exorbitant enough to buy a nice suburban home, but it was as meaningless to him as the lint in his pocket. He sent the text with his location, then leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Now for the other matter. The consequences. His thumb scrolled to another name, Samantha Reyes, Chief Counsel. Samantha was more than Etheria's top lawyer. She was his strategic right hand, a brilliant, tireless mind who could navigate the labyrinthine corridors of corporate and federal law better than anyone he knew. He knew she'd be awake. She always was. She answered on the first ring. "Roland." "What's wrong?" He recounted the incident at Gate B-74, his voice a flat monotone. He detailed every word, every look, every nuance of Captain Frank Gallagher's dismissive arrogance. He told her about Nina's medicine. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the phone line. Samantha's anger was a palpable force even from 1,000 miles away. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously soft. "Okay. He's gone. His career is over. I'll draft a letter to the CEO of Summit Air that will have Gallagher's wings on a platter by sunrise. We'll sue for discrimination endangerment." "No." Roland interrupted. "That's too small. That's personal. This isn't just about one ignorant pilot, Sam. It's about a culture of carelessness at that airline. A man with that kind of prejudice and poor judgment is in command of a multi-million-dollar aircraft with 100 souls on board. What other corners are they cutting? What other protocols are they ignoring?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "I don't want to just fire a pilot. I want to make an example of the entire airline. I want them to understand what true oversight feels like." Samantha was quiet, processing. She knew him well enough to know this wasn't just about revenge. It was about principle. It was about systems. "What do you have in mind?" Project Nightfall, Roland said, using the internal code name for their latest proprietary software. Samantha's breath hitched. "Roland, that's not just a software update. That's the new mandatory FAA avionics compliance suite. The Airworthiness Directive goes into effect." "My God. It goes into effect at midnight tonight," precisely, Roland said. "The AD 2025-1408. It mandates a full software patch for the flight control computer on all Embraer E175 models to correct a potential failure in the fly-by-wire system during certain icing conditions. Our software, and only our software, can provide that patch. Every major airline has been compliant for weeks. We sent out the final bulletins 60 days ago." "Where does Summit Air stand?" Samantha asked, already sensing the answer. "I had our compliance team check their status 2 weeks ago when we were finalizing our Q3 reports. They were laggards, kept filing for extensions citing cost and training schedule issues. The FAA gave them a final deadline of today, August 30th. To be fully compliant, their entire E175 fleet requires a direct data uplink and a sign-off from one of our certified engineers. The final signature on the fleet-wide compliance form, FAA Form 81303, requires my personal authorization as the head of the certifying company." He let the final piece fall into place. "The meeting I was flying to Seattle for tomorrow morning, it wasn't just with the DoD. It was a joint meeting with the FAA's Seattle Certification Office to personally deliver the signed-off Master Compliance Certificate for the entire domestic E175 fleet. It was a formality, a final handshake, but a necessary one." Samantha's mind, sharp as a razor, connected the dots with terrifying speed. "So, without your physical signature in that meeting, Summit Air's entire E175 fleet, which is what 80% of their operational aircraft, will be legally non-compliant with a mandatory federal airworthiness directive as of 0001 tomorrow morning. They will be flying illegal aircraft." Roland confirmed, a chill in his own voice. "They will be in direct violation of federal aviation law, and all it takes is one anonymous tip to the right person at the FAA. You're not just going to ground a plane," Roland, Samantha whispered, understanding the sheer scale of his response. "You're going to ground the entire airline." "Captain Gallagher wanted to exercise his authority," Roland said, watching a janitor mop the floor in the distance. "He's about to find out what real authority looks like. Get our team ready. We're going to let them take off in the morning. Let them get their whole operation underway. Then we make the call." Bob Peterson, the CEO of Summit Air, woke up at 5 a.m. just as he had every day for the past 20 years. His morning routine was a ritual of quiet confidence, a cup of black coffee, a brisk walk on the treadmill, and a review of the early morning operations report on his tablet. Summit Air was his baby. He'd built it from a scrappy regional carrier into a respectable player, albeit one that was constantly fighting for scraps against the legacy airlines. He prided himself on running a tight, efficient ship. That morning the reports looked good. Over 95% on-time departures. Weather was clear across their major hubs in Denver, Salt Lake City, and Portland. He took a sip of his coffee, feeling the familiar satisfaction of a well-oiled machine humming along. The first hint of trouble came at 7:05 a.m. in the form of a text message from his COO, Gary. It was a single sentence, "Call me. Urgent." Bob frowned. Gary wasn't prone to hyperbole. He dialed his number. "What's up, Gary? Don't tell me the Salt Lake City Baggage Handlers Union is threatening another walkout." "Worse?" Gary said, his voice strained. "Much worse." I just got off the phone with the FAA. It was William Davenport. Bob sat bolt upright. William Davenport wasn't some local field agent. He was the FAA's Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety. A call from him was the aviation equivalent of seeing the Grim Reaper holding your company's logo. What did he want? He informed me that as of 0800 Mountain Time Summit Air is to issue a mandatory and immediate grounding of our entire Embraer E-175 fleet, pending an emergency compliance review. Bob felt the coffee turn to acid in his stomach. The entire fleet. That's 73 aircraft. That's 80% of our operation. On what grounds? There must be a mistake. Airworthiness Directive, AD 225-1408. Gary said the code, sounding like a death sentence. The new avionics software update. Davenport said their records show we're non-compliant. He said he received an irrefutable tip this morning. They double-checked the logs, and we are in violation. The official notice is already on its way. It's a cease operations order. Bob, they're threatening to revoke our operating certificate if a single E-175 takes off after the deadline. Bob's mind was a maelstrom. The software update. He remembered the memos. His tech ops team, led by a man named Ken, had assured him they were handling it. They'd filed for an extension, sure, but they'd promised it would be done by the deadline. Get Ken on the line. Now Bob roared, already throwing on a suit. His quiet morning was shattered. By the time he arrived at Summit Air's corporate headquarters, the crisis was escalating into a full-blown catastrophe. Phones were ringing off the hook. The operations center looked like a war room. Every flight board was a sea of red canceled, delayed, canceled. The financial implications were staggering. Each grounded plane represented thousands of dollars in lost revenue per hour. Then there were the costs of deplaning passengers, rebooking them on other airlines, paying for hotel vouchers, overtime for staff. The numbers spiraled into the millions with every passing minute. It was a tsunami of red ink, and it was threatening to drown them. Ken, the head of technical operations, stood before Bob in his office, pale and sweating. Bob, I swear we were on top of this. We had the software patch ready to install. But there's a final step. A digital key. It required a sign-off from the vendor, a company called Etheria Dynamics. They were supposed to finalize the certification this morning. My team has been calling them since 6 a.m. We can't get anyone to answer. It's like the company vanished. Etheria Dynamics. Bob repeated the name, sounding vaguely familiar. Why in God's name would they ghost us on the most critical deadline of the year? I don't know, Ken exclaimed, his voice cracking. They're the sole provider. We have no other options. Without their key, we're dead in the water. Just then, Bob's assistant buzzed in. Mr. Peterson, I have the head of customer relations on the line. She says there's an incident report from last night you need to see. From Flight 1127 out of Denver. I'm dealing with the potential bankruptcy of this company, and she's worried about a lost bag on the Denver flight, Bob snapped. It's not a lost bag, sir, his assistant said quietly. It was a passenger who was denied boarding. He filed a formal complaint via email at 11:15 p.m. last night. The passenger's name was Dr. Roland Maxwell. Bob froze. The name. Etheria Dynamics. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to creep up his spine. Tell me about the passenger, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A pilot, Captain Frank Gallagher, denied him boarding at the gate. The captain cited last-minute arrival and agitated behavior in his report, and who Bob asked, already knowing the answer, is Dr. Roland Maxwell. His assistant took a breath. Sir, according to a quick search, he's the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics. The tablet in Bob Peterson's hand slipped from his grasp, and clattered to the floor. The screen spiderwebbed with cracks. He stared at his frantic tech chief, at the chaos unfolding outside his window, at the stock ticker on his monitor that was about to nosedive into oblivion. It wasn't a technical glitch. It wasn't a bureaucratic error. It was a single passenger. A CEO. A man they had slighted, and that man with a quiet phone call had just brought their entire airline to its knees. The problem wasn't in their servers. It was at gate B74. "Get me Captain Frank Gallagher's file," Bob ordered, his voice dangerously calm. "And get me a phone number for Dr. Roland Maxwell. It seems I need to make the most important apology of my life." Captain Frank Gallagher whistled a cheerful tune as he walked through the employee entrance at Denver International Airport. It was a beautiful, clear morning, and he was scheduled for the lucrative round trip to Cancun. He'd slept well the minor incident with the pushy passenger last night already forgotten. In his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had enforced his authority, kept his schedule, and protected his flight from a potential nuisance. He was the picture of a confident veteran pilot. His confidence lasted until he swiped his keycard to access the pre-flight briefing room, and it beeped red. Access denied. He frowned and tried again. Red. A younger pilot walking past gave him a strange look. "Having trouble, Frank. Card must be busted," Gallagher muttered, annoyed. He walked over to the main operations desk. "Hey, Janet, my card's not working. Can you let me in, Janet?" A woman who normally had a smile for everyone looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It was a mix of pity and fear. "Frank, Director Stevens needs to see you. In his office. Right now." Director Stevens was the chief of flight operations for the Denver hub. A meeting with him wasn't unusual, but the tone in Janet's voice set off a small alarm bell in Gallagher's head. He grunted and made his way to the administrative offices. When he entered the office, he knew this was serious. It wasn't just Director Stevens. Seated behind the desk, looking like he hadn't slept in a week, was Bob Peterson, the CEO of Summit Air, who had clearly flown in on the corporate jet. Standing by the window was a stern-faced woman in a suit whom Gallagher didn't recognize. "Frank, come in." "Close the door," Peterson said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Gallagher's swagger faltered. "Mr. Peterson, this is a surprise. What's going on?" "My flight to Cancun boards in an hour. Your flight has been assigned a new captain," Peterson stated coldly. "In fact, all of your flights have been assigned new captains indefinitely. You are being placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation." Gallagher's jaw dropped. "What? On what grounds? My record is spotless. 30 years without a single major incident." The woman by the window spoke for the first time. She was from the legal department. "Mr. Gallagher, we're investigating an incident that occurred last night regarding your command of Flight 1127. Specifically, your decision to deny boarding to a ticketed passenger, Dr. Roland Maxwell." Gallagher scoffed, a wave of indignant relief washing over him. "That's it. Some guy in a hoodie who showed up late and got aggressive. I made a command decision. It's my right as pilot in command. The FAA gives me final say on who boards my aircraft." Peterson's fist slammed down on the desk, making Gallagher jump. The CEO's face was purple with rage. "Your command decision, Frank. Your command decision has unleashed a corporate apocalypse on this company. Do you have any idea what is happening right now?" He gestured wildly at the window toward the tarmac. "Look out there. Every single one of our Embraer jets is grounded. 73 of them canceled flights in every city we service. Tens of thousands of stranded passengers. We are hemorrhaging millions of dollars an hour. Our stock is in free fall. The FAA is breathing down our necks with threats of revoking our certificate, and it all leads back to you, at gate B74. Gallagher was utterly bewildered. How is that possible? Because of one passenger complaint. He wasn't just a passenger, you fool, Peterson roared, his voice hoarse. Do you know who Dr. Roland Maxwell is? He is the CEO of Etheria Dynamics, the company that designed, built, and is the sole provider of the mandatory avionics software that the FAA required our entire E-175 fleet to have installed by midnight last night. The pieces began to click into place in Gallagher's mind, each one a hammer blow to his arrogance. The name on the ID he'd refused to look at. Etheria Dynamics. He was flying to Seattle to sign the final compliance certification for our whole fleet, the lawyer explained, her voice like ice. When you denied him boarding, you didn't just strand a passenger, you severed our company's lifeline to federal compliance. As a direct result of your actions, our airline is currently in massive fleet-wide violation of federal law. Gallagher sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. The confident pilot was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling man. He had seen the memos about the software. He, like many of the other pilots, had grumbled about the new technology, the endless training modules. He'd dismissed it as more corporate busywork. He never imagined the architect of that entire system would be the man in the hoodie he'd so casually dismissed. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't know because you didn't look, Peterson shot back. You didn't listen. You saw a black man in a hoodie and you made a judgment. A judgment that has put the jobs of our 8,000 employees at risk. A judgment that may very well bankrupt this company. You didn't just deny him a seat, Frank. You spat in the face of the one man on Earth who could shut us down with a single phone call. And he did. Gallagher looked down at his hands, the same hands that had confidently guided billion-dollar aircraft through thunderstorms and crosswinds. They were shaking. His 30-year career, his pride, his identity, it was all unraveling because of a 2-minute interaction born of pure, unadulterated prejudice. The smirk he'd given Dr. Maxwell at the jet bridge door now felt like the stupidest, most costly expression he had ever made in his life. Hand over your company ID and your airport credentials, the lawyer commanded. You will be escorted from the premises. Do not contact any other Summit Air employees. You will be hearing from us. As 2 airport security officers arrived to escort him out, Frank Gallagher walked past the bustling gates, the frantic agents, and the angry passengers. He was no longer a captain. He was just a man who had been given a little bit of power and had used it to ruin himself and everyone around him. The king of the metal tube had been dethroned not by a storm or a mechanical failure, but by the quiet dignity of the man he had wronged. The call to Dr. Roland Maxwell was the most humiliating act of Bob Peterson's professional life. He sat in his office, the silence heavy around him, while Samantha Reyes, Etheria's formidable chief counsel, patched him through. He had rehearsed a dozen opening lines from profusely apologetic to professionally direct, but they all felt hollow. Dr. Maxwell, he began when the connection was made. Mr. Peterson Rowland's voice came through clear and impossibly calm. There was no anger, no triumph, just the cool detachment of a surgeon observing a patient. Dr. Maxwell, sir, on behalf of the entire Summit Air organization, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for the absolutely inexcusable treatment you received from our employee last night. Captain Gallagher's actions were reprehensible, and they do not reflect the values of our company. The values of your company, Mr. Peterson, are reflected in the actions of the people you empower, Roland replied evenly. And the man you empowered chose to ground a flight over his personal prejudice. The fact that I was the CEO of your most critical technology supplier is a coincidence. The fact that he was willing to do it at all is the problem. Peterson swallowed hard. This wasn't going to be easy. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse. I have already placed him on indefinite leave, and I assure you his employment with Summit Air will be terminated. But right now, sir, I have an airline that is paralyzed. We have 73 grounded planes and tens of thousands of people stranded. We are losing. Well, we are in a catastrophic financial situation. We need the compliance certification. We need the software key. I am begging you, what will it take to make this right? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Peterson could hear the faint, steady hum of what sounded like a private jet's cabin. Of course. Dr. Maxwell was already in the air on his way to solve the problem Gallagher had created, but on his own terms and on his own timeline. This is no longer about making it right for me, Mr. Peterson, Roland said finally. My daughter received her medicine this morning. No thanks to your airline. This is now about making it right for every single passenger who might face a pilot like Frank Gallagher. It's about the systemic rot that allows a man like that to hold a position of such immense power and responsibility. Peterson held his breath. This was it. The terms. So here is what is going to happen, Roland continued, his voice taking on a hard, non-negotiable edge. First, the cost. Etheria Dynamics will charge you a one-time emergency activation and fleet certification fee. Let's call it $5 million. Peterson flinched. It was a staggering number. Second, Roland went on, ignoring the CEO's unspoken shock that fee will not go to my company. You will donate the full $5 million to a consortium of non-profits I will select. Specifically, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund Black Girls Code and a scholarship fund for minority aviation students at Purdue University. The donation will be made and receipts provided to my office before the activation key is released. This was not a shakedown. This was penance. Third, you will immediately contract a third-party diversity, equity, and inclusion firm, one of my choosing, to conduct a mandatory company-wide training program. It will start with your entire executive leadership team and extend down to every single pilot, flight attendant, and gate agent you employ. Your company's annual bonus structure for senior management will be tied to the successful completion and measurable results of this program for the next 3 years. And finally, Roland said, his voice lowering slightly, you will issue a public statement, not a vague corporate apology about a service disruption. You will state clearly that your fleet was grounded due to a failure in management that allowed a pilot to deny boarding to a passenger based on racial bias. You will name Captain Gallagher. You will not hide behind euphemisms. You will own it. All of it. Peterson was speechless. This was more than a financial penalty. It was a complete and total surrender. It was a public flagellation. He would be admitting his company's culture was broken, that it was institutionally prejudiced. The stock would plummet even further. The board would be furious. Those are my terms, Roland concluded. You have 1 hour to accept them. If I do not have your signed agreement via email by then, my counsel, Ms. Reyes, who is on this call, is instructed to forward our entire file on your airline's safety and compliance lapses, which we have been meticulously documenting, not just to the FAA, but to the National Transportation Safety Board. You think this grounding is bad? Let's see how you fare under a full federal probe. The choice is yours, Mr. Peterson. The line went silent, but the ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Bob Peterson looked around his office at the pictures of new planes being christened at the awards for customer service. He had 2 paths. He could fight this, let pride and ego drag his company into a protracted legal and regulatory war with a billionaire tech genius who had the full moral and legal high ground, a war that would certainly destroy Summit Air. Or he could swallow his pride accept his company's failings and do what the man on the phone demanded. He could pay the price, learn the lesson, and maybe, just maybe, save the jobs of his 8,000 employees. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I accept, Bob." Peterson said the words tasting like ash. "I accept all of your terms." The news of Captain Frank Gallagher's termination spread through the pilot community like a shockwave. At first, it was whispered rumors in crew lounges and on online forums. A pilot fired for a simple gate denial. It seemed impossible. Pilots were the final authority. That was the bedrock of aviation safety. But then the official story came out, pieced together from internal memos and the eventual humiliating press release from Summit Air. The story wasn't about a simple denial. It was about a catastrophic error in judgment with unbelievable consequences. Frank Gallagher wasn't a martyr for pilot authority. He was a cautionary tale about arrogance and prejudice. His fall from grace was swift and brutal. The FAA, prompted by the incident, opened its own investigation and within weeks revoked his airline transport pilot license, citing conduct demonstrating a lack of care, judgment, and responsibility. Without that license, his career was over. No reputable airline in North America would touch him. He couldn't even fly cargo planes for a regional puddle jumper. He found himself grounded in a way he never imagined. His life had been defined by the sky, by the view from the cockpit, by the respect that came with the 4 stripes on his shoulder. Now his days were filled with a crushing silence, punctuated by calls from lawyers and angry former colleagues who blamed him for the company's mandatory pay cuts and grueling retraining schedules. He tried to fight it, of course. He hired a lawyer and made noise about wrongful termination, claiming he was a scapegoat. But Samantha Reyes, on behalf of Etheria Dynamics, had documented everything so perfectly, and Summit Air's own internal investigation was so damning that his case was laughed out of preliminary hearings. He had made a decision based on his perception of a passenger, and that passenger happened to hold all the cards. There was no legal protection for that kind of stupidity. The financial toll was just as devastating. His pension was drastically reduced, and his stock options in Summit Air were now worthless. He had to sell his house, the one with the big backyard, where he'd hosted barbecues for his flight crews. His wife, who had once looked at him with admiration, now looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and resentment. The respect he had commanded in the cockpit did not translate to his new life as a pariah. One afternoon, months after the incident, he found himself at a small municipal airport watching student pilots practice takeoffs and landings in tiny Cessna 172s. The whine of their single-prop engines was a pathetic echo of the powerful roar of the jets he used to command. He remembered the feeling of pushing the throttles forward of the aircraft, surging with power, of lifting off the ground and climbing into the endless blue. It was a freedom and power he had taken for granted, and one he would never feel again. He thought back to that night at Gate B-74. He tried to pinpoint the exact moment his life had veered off course. It wasn't one thing he realized. It was 1,000 small moments, a lifetime of subtle biases, and an overinflated sense of his own importance. He'd seen a man in a hoodie and made an assumption. He hadn't seen a brilliant engineer, a powerful CEO, or a desperate father. He had only seen what his prejudice allowed him to see. He had judged a book by its cover, and the book had turned out to be the entire library. The karma wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and absolute. It was the silence of his phone not ringing with a schedule from crew services. It was the emptiness of the sky that had once been his office. It was the gut-wrenching knowledge that he had single-handedly thrown away a 30-year career, his reputation, and his future, all for a fleeting moment of petty discriminatory power. He had closed a door on one man and in doing so had closed every important door in his own life forever. The fallout from the Summit Air incident, as it was swiftly dubbed by aviation industry journals, was not a flash fire, but a long, slow burn that cauterized the airline and left an indelible scar. It became the new textbook example of corporate social responsibility, a brutal case study taught at Harvard Business School on the hidden liabilities of a toxic culture. The story was a stark, modern parable about the asymmetrical nature of power in a hyper-connected world. For Summit Air, the days that followed their near-death experience were a blur of painful public humility. Bob Peterson, stripped of his usual bravado, stood before a phalanx of cameras and delivered the most difficult press conference of his life. He didn't hide behind the polished evasions of corporate speak. As per Dr. Maxwell's non-negotiable terms, he laid the truth bare. He spoke of a catastrophic failure in judgment of a culture that had allowed prejudice to supersede professionalism, and he named Captain Frank Gallagher as the catalyst for the crisis. The admission was a gut punch to the company's pride, and the stock predictably shuddered. But then something unexpected happened. After the initial shock, a current of grudging respect began to flow from the market and the public. In an age of corporate denial, Summit Air's radical transparency was seen not just as penance, but as a credible first step toward redemption. The internal changes were even more profound. The mandated DEI training sessions were met with initial resistance, particularly from the old guard of veteran pilots who saw them as a punitive and condescending response to one guy's bad day. But the firm Roland had selected was relentless. They didn't use platitudes. They used flight simulator data cockpit voice recordings and NTSB reports to demonstrate how unconscious bias could lead to fatal communication breakdowns and flawed decision-making in high-stress environments. They made it about safety, the one language every pilot understood. Slowly, cynics began to listen. Grumbling in the crew lounges didn't disappear overnight, but it was now met with quiet challenges from younger pilots who saw the new policies as a path to a stronger, more resilient company. Meanwhile, the ripples of the $5 million donation spread far beyond Summit Air's balance sheet. At Purdue University, a young woman named Maria Sanchez, the daughter of immigrant farm workers from California, sat staring at her laptop in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. She had the grades and the skill to be a top-tier aerospace engineer, but her family's finances made the dream seem impossibly distant. The email in her inbox informed her she was the inaugural recipient of the Etheria Aviators Scholarship, a full-ride award that would cover her entire 4-year degree. Her joyous screams brought her parents running into the room, their confusion turning to tearful embraces as she explained that her future had just been rewritten. In Oakland, a group of teenage girls at a Black Girls Code workshop huddled around a new bank of computers running a flight control simulation. Their new Aerospace Coders module, funded entirely by the donation, was the most popular program they offered. They weren't just learning Python and C++. They were designing the logic for virtual autopilots and navigation systems, their imaginations soaring long before they were old enough to get a pilot's license. And in New York, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, armed with a fresh infusion of capital, successfully filed a class action lawsuit against a major hotel chain for discriminatory booking practices using the public admission of Summit Air as a powerful precedent in their legal arguments. An act of exclusion at an airport gate had become a potent weapon for inclusion across the country. Dr. Roland Maxwell observed all of this from a quiet distance. He never gave an interview, never commented on the articles written about him. His victory was not in the public acknowledgement, but in the tangible results. His focus remained laser-sharp on his work, and more importantly, his family. His daughter Nina was thriving. The clinical trial had been a resounding success. Her laughter, now a constant bright sound in their home, was the only validation he ever needed. The memory of his desperate race against time, thwarted by one man's ignorance, had faded, replaced by the simple, profound joy of watching his child be a child. Nearly a year later, Roland was the keynote speaker at the annual Aerospace and Defense Symposium in Washington, D.C. He delivered a dense technical speech on the future of autonomous drone navigation, and as the event wound down, he was making his way through the crowded lobby when a hesitant voice cut through the din. "Excuse me." Dr. Maxwell Roland turned to see a young pilot in a crisp new Summit Air uniform. He couldn't have been more than 25, with a bright, earnest face and a nervous energy that was immediately apparent. For a fleeting second, the uniform created a ghost of tension in Roland's chest, but it vanished as quickly as it came. This was the new Summit Air. "Yes," Roland replied. "Sir, my name is David Chen. I'm a first officer on the E-175. I just wanted to thank you." The young man's voice was filled with a sincerity that was almost overwhelming. "I'm a first-generation college graduate. I finished top of my class, but I was buried in debt. I wouldn't have been able to afford my flight certifications. I wouldn't have been able to finish my training if it weren't for the Etheria Aviators Scholarship." Roland stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the profound, perfect symmetry of the encounter. Here, standing before him, was the living, breathing consequence of his choice. He hadn't just grounded a fleet, he had launched a career. He hadn't just ended a man's tenure. He had begun this young man's journey. This was the result he had envisioned, not just a correction, but a creation. He extended his hand, a warm smile finally breaking across his face. "You earned it, Mr. Chen. Your hard work earned it. The scholarship just cleared the path." "You cleared the path," Sir David insisted, shaking his hand firmly. "My whole family is grateful. Is there anything at all I can ever do to repay you?" Roland held the young pilot's gaze, seeing in him the future of an industry he loved. "Yes, there is one thing. Do me one favor." "Anything, sir?" "When you're the captain, when you have that authority, and you see a passenger running late for the gate, out of breath and full of worry," Roland said, his voice low and steady, "see the person first. Not the clothes, not the color of their skin, just the person. Give them the benefit of the doubt. That's how you repay me." David Chen nodded, the weight and history of those simple words settling upon him. He understood this wasn't just advice. It was a sacred trust, a lesson passed down from a crisis he would never have to experience. "Yes, sir," he said with conviction. "I will. I promise." As the young pilot walked away, merging back into the crowd with a new sense of purpose in his step, Roland felt a final quiet sense of closure. He hadn't sought revenge on Frank Gallagher. Revenge was a fire that consumed itself and left only ash. He had sought something far more difficult and infinitely more satisfying, a systemic recalibration. He had turned an act of malice into a catalyst for progress. The sky above was the same vast, unforgiving expanse, but he knew that tonight a few more of its pilots, engineers, and dreamers were looking up at it with hope, all because a door had been slammed shut, and he'd had the power to build a better one in its place. Thank you for listening to this story of karma and consequence. It's a powerful reminder that in our interconnected world, every action has a reaction, often in ways we can never predict. A moment of prejudice from a pilot who thought he was king of his domain set off a chain reaction that grounded an airline, ended a career, and ultimately created millions of dollars in opportunities for the very communities he looked down upon. Dr. Roland Maxwell didn't just seek revenge. He sought restorative justice, using his immense leverage not for personal gain, but to fix a broken system. This story shows that true power isn't about loud commands and displays of authority. It's often quiet, strategic, and moves behind the scenes. It's a lesson for every leader, every employee, and every person. Treat everyone with respect, because you never ever know who you're talking to. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories of justice and karma. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below profile picture.